There he is. Gary.
Hi, buddy.
How are you, pal?
I'm terrific.
You look terrific.
I do.
You look like a man of leisure.
That's what I've become. Although I'm working. I'm writing a book that I think you will really enjoy because it's a memoir of kindergarten through 12th grade. And I know your feelings about that and your memory for it and your amusement over it. So I think it'll be a good read for you. I know a lot of times we get sent books that we're not interested in, but this one I think is will be up your alley because also we're just about the same age.
When I see the name Gary Gulman on the cover of a book, I am reading that book. I guarantee you, no matter the subject. But that does sound like it's in my wheelhouse.
That's a great blurb. Oh, that's a perfect
yours.
blurb.
I speak in blurbs, my friend. You know that about me.
Yes.
So how are you, buddy? How is life in the pandemic treating you? These are very odd, very specific times. How are you keeping?
Well, I feel almost guilty because I have this project, and so I have something to work on every day, and it occupies my mind and my time, and I can send it out, and people can give me feedback on it, and so I feel like I'm in the mix of something. So I feel, I mean, I've always walked around with guilt over my blessings and whatnot, that my mind won't let me wrap my head around the fact that I'm not doing anything wrong right now by not getting out on stage every night and working. So it's not perfect, but I'm in a much better position than most people. So I'm very, very grateful for that.
And that's such an interesting point to make. And one of the things that I love about you, just kind of core to your being, is this outlook of gratitude, this perspective that sees beyond yourself. And that's not really encouraged in American society or in comedy specifically, where, I think we're kind of encouraged to have a narrow, more selfish look, a perspective on the world, and to, make sure that you're doing everything you can for yourself in this kind of winning paradigm of looking at life. And you certainly have, both with your special and I think it's kind of a theme that runs through your comedy. You see the larger picture. You see your place in the world and kind of the whole of society. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I keep coming back to this expression that they attribute to I think Barry Switzer, who doesn't seem sharp enough to come up with this great quote, but he talks about people being born on third base and think they hit a triple, and
that's his quote?
He's given credit for it.
Uh-huh.
And I've tried so hard to find an origin, but it's usually attributed to him or a Texas journalist, but the Texas journalist, I can't remember his name right now, so I have to say Barry Switzer. But the point is that I was born on third base, and I recognize that I was born on third base in the fact that I'm a white male who grew up in a time when public schools were funded, and I had my mother received welfare benefits, food stamps, and all these things, and there wasn't the demonizing of the poor, and there wasn't the idea that this was a handout. And so I had athletic gifts that really I had no right to. Neither of my parents were great athletes. My brothers were marginal athletes, and so I got a scholarship to play football at Boston College, which is this great Jesuit learning institution that I never would have even gotten into. Never mind gotten free tuition and board. So and also I'm of above average intelligence. So I had all these things that I had nothing to do with. I didn't select them. I didn't choose them over anything else. And I as I'm writing this book, I'm thinking back to my mindset when I was a little kid. There was this thing, and I don't know where I got it from, but I felt like, well, I was very religious without knowing much about religion. I believed God was controlling things at all times. And I was convinced that God was going out of his way to make everything fair. So the fact that I could read really well in first grade, that was my gift. But somebody who wasn't a good reader in first grade, then they would be really good looking. That would be their reward. Because I remember this really cute kid who sat in front of me. I was like, this kid is sounding out but he's so cute. This is how God works. He's evening the playing field. And then I got to eighth grade, and I was like, oh no, there's no justice. There's no God looking out there. There are kids who are not only unattractive, but they're reading at a fourth grade level, and I was disillusioned and very, very sad. I still had this great conversation with God going, but it was hard to wrap my mind around the inequality. And I've really never stopped. Like I don't want everybody to feel guilty, but there should be some shame involved in the obstacles that were put in place for people who were not born on third base, like I feel I was, and given so many advantages over the years. So when I was listening to you with Laurie Kilmartin yesterday, I was thinking that the women who started off in comedy 20, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago, were facing this obstacle. And it really hit me when she said, I couldn't say anything because I was begging for a $500 a week work.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to complain because the headliner is making lewd and obnoxious comments to me in the green room, and the MC is making it difficult for me by talking about my body or whatever it is that women have to go through.
Yeah.
And so I to hear a lot of white male comedians say, oh, I can't get any work anymore. I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't get a special. I think, well, I feel bad for you, and I'm not going to rub it in your face, but we had a really good run where it was really easy. And we never said, or few of us ever said, hey, these other people are having a really hard time of it. Can we get less work and maybe even things out a bit? We didn't
Sure.
complain about that. And I was talking about this with Todd Glass the other day, who also listened to the episode and was raving about it. And he said, we were talking about, I said, Todd, do you remember women complaining about how little work they were getting because they were women? Was there a lot of that going on? How they couldn't get a special, how they couldn't get headlining work? And there may have been some, not as much as I hear these guys now.
Right. And I think, that is kind of like a side effect of all of these movements that many people are quick to deride. But what it has done is it has centered people advocating for themselves, whether it's Me Too, Black Lives Matter, so many of the social justice movements that have taken root. It has kind of mainstreamed advocating for yourself and not putting up with this kind of shit. So I hear a lot of the things that you're talking about as well, with, white guys saying, and they'll even, they'll say it to me kind of conspiratorially, like, I mean, come on, Ted, you should have this or that, or you should be, and I say the same thing. I'm like, look, I was on Comedy Central for over a decade. It's not like, what am I going to suddenly complain that the system is failing me? Like the system that I was thriving in was fucked up, like the system
right,
that elevated me, whatever my gifts may have been, it was built for me, So I have no problem with a system that's leaving me out to whatever extent it is now, And fortunately, the system that we're in obviously needs to be mended. But as you say, I think we need to start from a place of acknowledging the ills of the system. So I like that you do that. And I wanted to just jump off to a point that you made in the Great Depresh, which I loved. And I told you that, and I want to tell you that again, because it was really the melding of the highest craft of comedy and the telling of a personal story, and particularly vulnerable story. So thank you for that. But I wanted to also just point out that you talked about millennials in a way that I love, that was counter to the narrative of mainstream society, and specifically, I think, comedy culture, that likes to comedy culture can often be, as I said in that episode with Laurie Kilmartin, can be steeped in kind of white bro culture and goes for the easy laugh of like shitting on really everyone, and specifically anyone who's trying to point out an injustice. And in the Great Depresh, you spoke about millennials in a way that you said how kind they were to one another, and you spoke about them in a way that was kind of radical within stand-up comedy circles. Can you discuss the piece that I'm talking about, the piece of
certainly. And I appreciate that you appreciate it, because your opinion and your taste are important to me. So I will say that, and you probably noticed this too, you start to talk about millennials at a comedy club where they're not there to see you. So when I go to the Comedy Cellar or to the West Side Comedy Club or Gotham, the audience doesn't know I'm going to be on the show usually when I'm working out. And they've seen a lot of stand-up that night, and also they've also seen a lot of stand-up in their life, and so they kind of know what stand-ups all talk about. They all talk about how for years it was about how bad their mother-in-law was, about how lousy their wife's cooking was, and now it's about how entitled, lazy, and weak millennials are. And so when I see that, just I question it, because it's so easy. And I also have a millennial wife. I have nephews, nieces. I have people in my audiences that are there to see me, and they think in a better way than I did when I was a kid. So when I went to college, we were all looking to get rich. We really wanted to get rich, and we could have been activists about things. And I try not to feel guilty over not being more active in social movements back then. But it's more shame, because I feel like if we or I know you were always involved in this, but if more of us had been involved in that, then these kids now wouldn't have to put on a mask and go out there at a time when really they're literally risking their lives to go out there. Okay, so when I hear every comedian, and a lot of comedians who I have to be honest with you, I'm not that impressed with. I think they just are doing covers, maybe not of jokes, but of premises. They're doing premise covers, which is millennials are this, that, and the other thing. The audience is on board with them, and the audience is expecting it. So I would bring up millennials, and I would hear the audience.
And if I could interrupt for just for 1 second, Gary, because in a way it's an offshoot of that. it's a whole genre of comedy, right? That
Yes.
like we had it harder than,
Yes.
but now it's like
Yes.
they have a new word, millennials. They have a new word
Yeah.
to attach to it.
It's just kids these days comedy, and I don't want to put my act on your show because it's like I'm pimping you, but one thing I said was that kids these days humor was pretty hacky when Bye Bye Birdie came out. It was already, and so I'm not impressed by it. I don't want to do it. And also, I have some pretty valid arguments about the behavior of millennials in general. In general, and studies have been done. They're much less selfish than we were. They're much less motivated by money and status than we were. They're much less concerned with materialism and things like that. They're much more concerned with the environment. They're on a whole better people than me. So as a comedian, or as good comedians, you and I were always looking for something that nobody else is saying. And I used to think to myself, why are these hacks making it so easy for me to stand out, to be different? It shouldn't be this easy. I just have to say pretty much the opposite of what they're saying. I have to have a reasonable stand on peanut allergies. That's how easy you're making it for me. People screaming that there were no peanut allergies in the 70s. There were a number of peanut allergies in the 70s. So I took that, I put it on stage, and I think and they're much more aware of mental health issues. There's much less of a stigma within their community. They go to therapy, and they're not sneaking into their therapist's office like I did in 1989 for the first time, and embarrassed and not telling everybody, not even my girlfriend, that I was in therapy and that I was depressed. So I think, I mean, you use the word radical, which I think is interesting, because maybe it's radical in the context of mainstream stand-up comedy, but in a sense, it's reason.
Sure. Yeah, and that always seems to be the case when something radical hits the mainstream, is that it truly is common sense, and it's rooted in the most basic of kind of human decency, but oddly that becomes radical.
Yeah, I mean, how often do you think about, and I don't know if it's my fear of mortality or selfishness or ego, but I think a lot, and Todd Glass and I discussed this, and I'll ask a lot of comedians. I think to myself a lot, how will this hold up? How will this hold up in 10 years, in 20 years? I'm not saying that I want to do my act the same way for 20 years, but I think about takes and opinions and think, are people going to look back in 30 years like I do with certain Carlin stuff and Bob Newhart, and think, this guy was prescient. This guy was, Dick Gregory, my word. And Pryor, and yes, there are things that you hear from them and you think, well, that's silly. I don't know that holds up. But for the most part, these things hold up, and I listen. I don't think about a legacy or pretentious things like that. But I do hope that I won't be cringing when I hear my act when I'm in my 70s, and that people will say, no, I think it's not that hard to be on the side of right. I hear a lot of excuses. It was a different time. My father, your father, my father was in World War II. I never heard him say even the Jewish ethnic type things that everybody gets a pass for, like behind your backs, Gentiles are often referred by Jews as goyim, and my father would not allow that. He found that so condescending, and he wouldn't allow that, and he was right. He was right. And people would say you're a prude, you're puritanical, you're soft, and he wasn't soft. He was actually a very strong, tough-minded man who served in a war, and yet he was careful with his words. It was inspiring, and he was proven right.
Yeah, and I'll have you know that my father was a Shabbos goy, which
oh, that's incredible. Explain that to people who are Jewish impaired.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but my dad grew up in Brooklyn, and in a Jewish section of Brooklyn, and
that was called Brooklyn.
That was called Brooklyn at the time. And being Goyim, being a Catholic boy, he would perform tasks for Jewish families who, after sundown on Friday, could not do certain things, whether it was turning lights on or off, or certain, they weren't allowed to engage with certain things during the Sabbath. So they had these what was the term again?
Shabbos goy.
Shabbos goy. So my dad was the Shabbos goy for many of these Jewish families.
It's a loophole in the Jewish religion that you can't turn on the lights, you can't turn on the television, but you can get a family friend to do it for you. And I'm sure God is detaching his retinas, rolling his eyes at that. I can't. Or what if you turned it on yourself? Is God saying, no, you're not getting into heaven. You need to get a Gentile to do that for you. There are these loopholes are comical.
Yeah. I think, God probably enjoys the ingenuity of it, that they found the loophole.
God loves a Rube Goldberg device as much as anybody.
Absolutely. So I wanted to ask you, because you came up through the Boston scene, and I was reflecting on, we're peers in terms of our when we started and kind of the road that we took, and I think also the kind of turns that we've made, because we kind of came up as club comics in these, we had to become battle tested in these insane rooms. You in Boston and me in kind of Long Island, the Long Island scene, because I was going back and forth between, Long Island had a thriving scene at the time that I was starting, early 90s, as well as, the New York City scene, obviously. But that Long Island scene was a big part of my formative years in comedy. And it was kind of hellacious in terms of, it was conservative, blue collar, and a lot of the types of comedy that you were talking about. It wasn't like me as I exist now. It would have been very hard to be that then. Now, my question to you, I was thinking about specifically the Great Depresh and your evolution as a comedian, as an artist, as a human being. Do you think you could have formed the Great Depresh in the rooms that you came up in? Would that have even been possible, or is it
no way? I could have answered that before you even got to the part. Ted, it was difficult to work it out in the clubs in New York City in 2018 when I first started writing it. There were certain aspects I would always have to open with stuff that had nothing to do with me being hospitalized for crippling depression and anxiety. Yeah. I had to ease into it. I had to abandon it some nights because they were just put off by it. And I think you were talking about this with Laurie, and the one question I and I'm sure we know the answer to this is you were talking about something that I've considered a lot, and I forget the term you used for it, but it's the idea that you are using every aspect of your life and existence and on stage and off stage to create something. And so the fact that your father was a Shabbos goy is this thing that you didn't think would ever come in handy, and then today it's the perfect thing to discuss. So every aspect of your life comes into play, including the fact that you are 25 years into a comedy career and you know exactly how to say things. So I felt like I'm not comparing myself to this guy, but this is a good analogy. I remember hearing an interview with John Singleton in which he said that he went to film school to learn how to write Boys in the Hood. Now, I didn't write Boys in the Hood, but I wrote my Boys in the Hood, which is this thing that has been an aspect of my life since I've known myself. And I needed at least 20 years of comedy to develop the skill, but more importantly, maybe the confidence to be able to deliver that. But then on top of that, I cultivated a small audience that would go with me the step after talking about state abbreviations, grapefruit, and cookies.
All classics.
Right, but they weren't as significant maybe or as heavy. They weren't as heavy as talking about electroconvulsive therapy and psych wards, but they trusted me.
Which can be abbreviated to ECT.
that they trusted me that I would get to some funny after I told them this thing about wanting to end my life. So they trusted me. But the audiences at the comedy clubs in New York City, they don't really know who I am. Maybe they know me from the Abbreviating the States or from Last Comic Standing when I was so much younger and less skilled. But they're gonna get tired or bored quickly if I do the theater version of the Great Depresh at the Comedy Cellar late night Friday after these guys just murder and women just murder on stage, and then I go up there and the what I would do is I would say, who here has ever been recognized in the psych ward? And based on the reaction to that, whether they laughed, I would go into some depression stuff. But mostly I had to work that out at the Comedy Studio in Cambridge, Massachusetts. That's where I worked out most of it. And then I would sneak portions of what I worked out there into my road work and slowly built it over a year. So the idea of doing it in Boston in the 90s, ridiculous. Oh, yeah. Although the Comedy Studio existed in the 90s when I was there, but I wasn't at a level where I could not fool around, but you know what I mean? Find the jokes, find the funny area, explore. I wasn't accomplished enough, and I wouldn't have known what to do. So I forget what the word you used for the way Laurie was able to combine her forces as a world-renowned writer and performer and these tragedies that were coming up in her life, and then to do it again with her mother because she was prepared, having done it with her father. She knew how to do this. I mean, I don't know where you...
Did I say distillation?
No, because I would have remembered that because it's such an esoteric, beautiful, obscure word that I've never said out loud. When I say it right now, distillation, that's the first time I've ever said that word. So I definitely would have remembered that. But I look for those opportunities in my work, those things where you say, oh, I was meant to talk about this. Somebody who didn't have the comedic skills and experience and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the last part, which I think is the confidence. They wouldn't be able to do it the same way I can. And the other side of it, because there was part of me that said, well, depression has been covered beautifully by Chris Gethard, Maria Bamford, and some other people. What do I bring to this? And at
two other people talked about it. Surely we're done.
Right, but they did it so well, and I didn't want to tread on that. The one thing I thought to myself is that I don't look like a person who gets really depressed and afraid and anxious and feels weak because I'm so big. And so I'm not bragging about this, but I'm physically someone you would think has it all together.
Sure.
And I didn't. And I always found those stories from in particular, and I know this guy is he has a lot of contradictions, but the one thing that he spoke about that I really admired him for was Terry Bradshaw opened up about being depressed. And I thought, well, then it's not something that you cure by achieving. And I was convinced of that for a long time. And I think a lot of Americans are convinced of that I hate myself because I'm not great at something. And you are not born hating yourself. There's chemistry and environment, but I keep talking too much. What do you think of the role of confidence? Because that's one thing about you, Ted, that I've always admired from early on. You were going to, even in your, you talked about you talked about the master class that you're giving, you talked about movement and your confidence is so clear in your movement. And I admire that. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to watch the episode of the master class you're giving where you talk about movement, because it's something I still struggle with and I'm concerned with. And I'm like, why are my hands doing this? And I can, one thing about movement that I will say is comedians, stop holding on to the mic stand throughout the entire show. Instead of putting your anxiety into the mic stand, put it out there into the audience. It's a literal crutch.
Well, yeah, no, I agree. And thanks for those kind words. I think, you're conveying so much moment to moment anytime that you're on stage. And part of that is your physical comportment. And, I remember just studying in the early going, watching the way comedians took the stage, and I would watch on mute. Sometimes I encourage young comedians to do that, like watch a set with the volume muted and really look, because so much is being communicated with the body, with the face. So yeah, for me, I think I always had the physicality as an element of what I did. But over years, like you said, with any of our evolution as performers, that component of it, I think became more and more honed so that I could accentuate a joke with a facial expression, sometimes even with stillness, holding a pose, holding a face, whatever it is, you can accentuate something. And it also communicates power to people that, and I don't mean power in the sense of domination. I mean power that I'm comfortable rooting myself in this moment. So, I think you are communicating constantly on stage, whether you're speaking or not. So movement is part of that. I wanted to talk to you, Gary, about in the Great Depresh. This was really, for me, undergirding the whole story. It was the foundation of the story, the love story between you and Sade. I found that to be so integral to the whole journey, her companioning you through this experience, this at times crippling experience of depression and hospitalization. Can you speak a little bit about the love story aspect of the Great Depresh and that companionship, that love relationship with Sade?
Yes, and just so the audience who is unfamiliar, I want them to know that it is not the Sade. It's a Sade, and people have actually said the Sade, and I say yes. I'm doing a $25 spot on a Wednesday, even though I'm the heir to the Smooth Operator royalty stream. Yeah,
your love is king.
So I'm not married to the Sade, but I'm so glad you asked about that, because we were talking last night. We were talking about you and how supportive and kind you are to her, and so she just adores you, and she's very particular
Likewise.
about who she lets in, and who she's shy and sort of on the introvert side of the scale. So
She's my
that's
favorite Sade.
mine too. So you are the first person to call it a love story, and I'm so glad, because that was so important. Because one thing was, we didn't have a lot of time. We wanted to do about 15 minutes of documentary footage, and there was some really great stuff that we got at my childhood home, and with our friend Bobby Kelly, and also me working out the jokes about electroconvulsive therapy for the first time at this great room in Brooklyn called Baby's All Right. And so there wasn't a lot of room, and I said, but we have to include Sade, because one of the most important aspects of my recovery is her companionship, her advocacy. She went to every single one of my psychiatry appointments and asked the questions I was either embarrassed or ashamed, or because sometimes you don't want to ask a psychiatrist a question because, for instance, I think he's going to dismiss this as some sort of get rich quick scheme or cure all snake oil, and yet she showed me that he was very open to some ideas and some that he wasn't, and this is how far she went. She grew psilocybin mushrooms in our Midtown apartment, and she was so dedicated. It worked. It's not easy. The measurements and the watering and the light have to be so precise, and
Wow.
she did it because she read an article about the use of microdosing of hallucinogens to help with depression, and those studies are actually pretty far along, and they've been shown to be very helpful. So anyhow,
Wow.
the lengths she did, and she gave me a bracelet recently, and it was so lovely, and I think you'll love this. It said, "Love me until I'm me again."
Mm.
And that was the whole thing. The other thing that I don't think people know, and maybe you remember this, was that I fell off the deep end about 6 months into our relationship with Sade.
Mm.
She knew I had depression and anxiety, but it had been in remission for years and years. So we got into this relationship. We moved in together within 6 months, and then I fell apart. And I would ask her, why did you stay? Why are you staying? Get out while you can, woman. And she said, well, it was a really good 6 months, and two, that's not who I am. I'm not going to abandon ship. Get better, and then we'll see what we want to do then. And I mean, I'm not one of these people who says everything happens for a reason. I think I could have gotten the same appreciation for her and understanding of who she was if my episode lasted 6 months rather than 2.5 years. But it is the ultimate test of someone's love and loyalty to have to go through that with someone. And she visited me every day in the psych ward, and she was on the phone with me and in there, and she was so helpful and just took over.
Yeah.
She just took over for me, and she is like Madeline. She's a ride or die. She's something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Really powerful. And again, like we were saying earlier, kind of counter to the comedy narrative of like making your wife a punchline or making your partner in some ways, like I think that's almost another genre of comedy to dehumanize your partner. But I felt like the Great Depresh did the opposite of that. It really showed Sade, your partner, your partner, correct? I don't want to use the wrong terminology. Wife, partner?
Wife is good, yeah.
Wife, okay.
Yeah.
To show Sade as really the leader in the relationship at certain points, as any relationship has. There's times when one or the other leads. But I thought it was so counter to that prevailing narrative of the male kind of, and again, in comedy, you see this so often of like the male being in some way dismissive or the woman being less than. I thought the Great Depresh really, in such a beautiful, seamless way, showed that relationship in its fullness.
Oh, thanks, man. That means so much to me, and I can't wait for Sade to hear this, because I mean, I go out of my way in interviews to acknowledge that she's really the MVP of the story. She's the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar,
and that's an abbreviation for most valuable player.
Most valuable player, yeah. Of the, but okay, so I don't want to give myself too much credit about being kind to women, because I was thinking of this again when I was listening to yesterday's episode, or I listened to it yesterday. I don't know if it came out yesterday, but don't these guys who are so obsessed with free speech and their art, supposedly, aren't they put off by the fact that they all sound like each other? That they're all doing different versions of their cult leaders, of the different factions within that fiefdom, that fiefdom that you were talking about, the bro wall, the bro club. Yeah, they're all talking about how, and they do the same voice for their women, and so I don't mean this in a pretentious way, but as an artist, originality is so important to me. And even if I did have a nagging wife who emasculated me and had a high-pitched voice and sounded like a combination of Edith Bunker and Lucille Ball, I would not do it. It's too easy. It's been done. How am I going to stand out in this field? And one thing you were saying that I love this, and Todd and I were crowing about this. We were like, he said they're willing to say anything except that their wife is an intelligent, valuable contributor to their life, and yeah. that they are equals. If Sade is not my equal, she's so much smarter and reasonable than I am.
And there it is again, right? It's radical to say that the person with whom I chose to spend my life is my partner, my equal, my superior in some ways. It's radical to, instead of doing a like this caricature of essentially, what are you really doing? All women, right? You're saying women. I'm talking about my wife right now, but you know what I really mean.
And it's paint by numbers comedy. And I remember saying one night at the Comedy Cellar, I said, my wife is a millennial and I love her. And everybody laughed like it was this crazy thing, because yes, it's very strange to hear a comedian say that he loves his wife.
That's true. Another radical notion. Yeah, and that's kind of intrinsic to the comedy culture that we came up in, that any kind of authentic expression of something that is perceived to maybe take your power away, right? To make yourself vulnerable, is seen as not comedic terrain. It's like, if you're going to talk about your partner or anything for that matter, it can't be something that is rooted in vulnerability or appreciation or has a softness at its core. but it is nice to see that changing, and certainly the Great Depresh was a big part of that dynamic of that softness, kindness are not, it's not mutually exclusive from funny, and I think that has been part of the comedy culture for a long time, that was looked down upon.
Nor is it separated from strength. I mean, sure. I forget what the exact quote by your Lord and Savior is, but my strength is made perfect in my weakness, or something according to those. So I
think that was Barry Switzer.
Jimmy Johnson. That's who it was. Jimmy Johnson. So I think that the more I learn and feel it, the real vulnerability was not when I went up there, or the real strength wasn't when I went up there and told jokes that were involved me being the hero of the story and really strong. They were the really strong, vulnerable ones that took some bravery, were the ones where I said, and I have to tell you, it was not brave. By the time I started talking about my hospitalization, I had gotten so much feedback in Cambridge at that club that I knew I was on the right side of things, and that I was, as long as it was funny, that the audience would go with me. Mm-hmm. I will say that the courage was when I admitted that I had a security blanket, a blankie, all through college, and that it was on my pillow right now. Like, that was something. Mm-hmm. I've known about this aspect of my life since I was 2 years old. I wasn't comfortable saying it in front of strangers until I was in my late 40s, and I think that, and again, there was no reason to worry. The reward, the feedback was incredible, and I'm sure there's some people who are calling me a cuckold, or now they're so familiar with that term that they've now they call it cuck, and yes. These people who do not show much cultural knowledge have this really obscure, arcane word, cuckold, coming out of their mouths, and I are they reading Madame Bovary? What is the source of this word that snowflake, but then even cuckold, and I get called a cuck because I am in favor of diminished suffering of the underclass, and I think that women should be paid equal to men. So I'm and so they call me a cuck, which it means that my wife is unfaithful. I'm aware of it, and I'm fine with it. That is a huge leap from equal wages.
Yes. I don't recall.
I assure you.
Yeah, that was not one of the themes in Madame Bovary.
That I would be outraged if my wife cheated on me.
As would I. Yes. Yeah, it is. It is
Ted,
funny
I
that
can't hear you for some reason. What is going on?
Oh, are we okay, Matthew? Matthew, can you hear me?
I hear you guys. I hear you guys.
You hear me?
Very fine.
Oh, Gary, can you hear me, pal? Hello? I don't know why. Was it something I said? You can hear me though, Matthew?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Yes.
Gary, can you hear me?
It's odd.
I hear you guys both loud and clear. I don't know. The internet is a fickle mistress sometimes.
Maybe this is the internet calling us both cucks.
If I disconnect.
We're just a couple of snowflakes that the internet is making sure that we know that. No? Well, what do you think, Matthew? Should he redo the link just so we can wrap up properly?
Gary, can you hear me? Nope. Something's wrong on Gary's end, I'm going with.
Okay.
I can hear you now.
Oh, you can.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I was saying this was the internet or technology calling us both cucks. we will silence these two cucks once and for all. Well, pal, it was somewhat fortuitous because we are close to wrapping up. We've gone way over what I had asked from you. So my apologies for going beyond the time that I requested. But I wanted to just ask.
All right. One second.
Oh, are we?
Ted, on my end, I'm going to put I'm so sorry.
No need to apologize, my friend.
Live streaming, everybody.
That's right.
All right. I'm going to try to. Okay, I can.
Check. Can you hear me, buddy?
Yeah, I can. Okay, we're back. I think we should be good.
Okay, good.
Right.
So I just wanted to ask you, pal, having finished this, this masterpiece of the Great Depresh, and then usually you want to kind of enjoy that and begin the next, right? Like as comedians, we kind of want to put whatever hour we just did to bed. Are you finding satisfaction in working on the book, or are you missing that are you missing the stage to kind of cleanse the palate of putting that to bed and moving on, or is the book kind of providing that opportunity?
A couple of things I will say, Ted. One, you use the word pal a lot, and I understand that to mean one thing in New York and a different thing in Boston. Do you know that?
No, does pal mean like cuck in Boston?
No, it means fuckface.
Is that right?
Yeah. If
you mean like like if it's said derisively, like listen to me, pal.
Listen, pal. Somebody is about to tell you off if they call you pal. So I have had to translate it. It's sort of like the way the British are more comfortable with one word than they are with the word fanny for some reason.
Right.
Whereas we're fine with fanny, but there it's like a mortal sin to say it. But okay, so the first thing is that I used gratitude very well at the beginning of the pandemic to say, yes, this is not perfect that you had to cancel a tour midway through, and it's disappointing because I love doing live shows and I enjoy it, and the audiences were really enjoying it, and I had written a new hour and a half to tour with, and it was going really well. It's mostly about income inequality, but told similarly to the Depression through my story of growing up with free lunch and all those things. And I
love it.
Yeah. So I was working on that. I was very happy with where that was going. And then I said, I actually listed all the shows I did on tour before the pandemic. And I said, you really couldn't have timed it better under the circumstances. You should be grateful for this, and you have this book opportunity. So I think about certain guys that we know who don't have other outlets and aren't at a position in their career where they can do other things related to comedy, but not exactly stand-up comedy. And I wanted to either today or at some point talk to you about you writing a book, because your facility with language and your experience and your story is compelling, and so we should definitely talk about that either right now in front of everybody or over the phone, because it's more viable now than ever, and it will expand certain aspects of your writing and your thinking, and so it's actually very helpful in our art and in our work, and it also helps you to appreciate books you read even more, because you realize how skilled some of these people are, and how unskilled others are, and get a pass because they made up this story about Leonardo da Vinci and Jesus Christ. So
I appreciate that. And that has been something that has kind of been coming back, and you've reintroduced it. So I think that is something that seems inevitable, that I will write something at some point.
There's a learning curve, and you just have to, the thing I kept having to say to myself is, I've figured out how to do things in the past that initially I said, this is impossible, I will never get it. And I just kept concentrating on that, and the fact that as recently as 3 years ago, I was like, I'll never be able to talk about depression on stage and make it funny. And so it's these things that you build confidence over the years, if you're a person who just doesn't have it naturally, and for however you get it, it's just a lot of times it's just living through failure and realizing that it doesn't kill you and it doesn't end your career. So the book has been a blessing, and has kept my attention and made me feel productive and disciplined. I mean, the other thing is that I am fortunate that I had socked away enough money where I didn't have to worry about getting on the road and borrowing money. So I'm just so grateful for that I had that opportunity, and the timing couldn't have been better, because I thought of people who put out specials during the pandemic. They couldn't promote it. I know our friend Judd Apatow made a film, and he had to do all this promotional work over the internet and release the film that could have been in theaters and at what do you call those things? Festivals.
Yeah.
And distillation.
Yeah.
And yes, nobody's crying for Judd Apatow, but my timing for this couldn't have been better. I got to do promotion live, and so I know it sounds Pollyannish or whatever, but gratitude is a really useful antidepressant.
Well, buddy, I appreciate you, and I appreciate this dose of the antidepressant that you've given all of us with your attitude of gratitude. And also, I have no doubt that both the book and eventually the next hour, when that resumes, will be beautiful pieces of must-see, must-read work. So thanks for making time to be with me. I always love talking to you, buddy.
It was my pleasure. And yeah, our friendship means
Matthew, hold on, Matthew. Hold on.
Our friendship means the world to me. And the fact also that we don't always get to know our comedian friends' families very well, but as you know, my wife and I vacationed with your parents at an exclusive couples.
That was one of my favorite things
in St. Lucia, which is incredible. And I know your sister and your brother and your nephews and
yes, indeed.
They're, believe it or not, audience, they're all as lovely as Ted. And in fact, Ted is sort of the knave of the family.
That's true. I'm a bit of a scamp. Well, thanks, Gary. They all love you. They love you as well. You know, my nephews have been to see you, and you were so kind to them. And my whole family loves both you and Sade. So thank you for being on the Ted Alexandro show, and for sharing so much wisdom and beauty with us.
How is Nico?
Nico is well, thank you. He's 7 months. He's flipping around. He hasn't crawled yet, but he's doing a lot of flipping.
Wow.
So Yeah. I call him the Boston Flipper. I don't know why I say it just felt like a literary character. So I say you're the Boston Flipper, and he flips around and he laughs. So he's great. He's great.
All right. Well, we'll have to do this again soon, so we can discuss more.
I would love that.
Things, because we have a nice flow with each other.
Yes,
and
we do.
Okay, and say hi to Madeline and the rest of the family. I love you, buddy.
I will. I love you too, and say hi to Sade.
I will. Okay, bye.
All right, buddy. Love you. Bye-bye. There we go.